The wind, whistling down from the Apennine Mountains, carried the sound of the German soldiers' laughter, a sound that sliced through the cold Italian air and the nerves of the waiting American troops. The message, broadcast over a captured Allied radio, was clear, mocking, and laced with the Nazis' chilling racial ideology. "Send us your best, not the Schwarze Soldaten. We will give them no quarter, for they are nothing but American Untermenschen." It was a taunt aimed directly at the U.S. Army's segregated 92nd Infantry Division, the famed Buffalo Soldiers. In the blood-soaked, unforgiving mountains of Italy, where the German Gothic Line stood as Hitler's final, seemingly unbreakable barrier, the men of the 92nd were facing a war on two fronts. One was against the fanatical, well-dug-in troops of the Wehrmacht and SS. The other was against the insidious, corrosive racism woven into the very fabric of the U.S. Army hierarchy that placed white officers in charge and often doubted the black soldiers' will and ability to fight. The story of the 92nd Infantry Division at the Gothic Line is not just a tale of combat. It is a profound, astounding chronicle of American heroism forged in a crucible of racial prejudice, a battle where the victory achieved wasn't merely against the German army, but against the vile doctrine of white supremacy, both foreign and domestic. This is the untold, extraordinary saga of the Buffalo Soldiers who crushed Hitler's last Italian defense, a story that begins far from the front lines, in the sun-baked, segregated landscapes of America. The Crucible of Segregation, Fort Huachuca. The 92nd Infantry Division was reactivated in October 1942, nearly a year after America entered World War II. Its official designation was colored, and it was immediately a political and military lightning rod. Most of the 15,000 enlisted men were African American, drawn from every state, eager to prove their patriotism in a war against fascism, even as they were denied basic rights at home. Their training grounds were Fort Huachuca, a desolate, isolated outpost in Arizona, a world away from the European theater. Here, the Buffalo Soldiers, a name inherited from the black cavalry units of the 19th century, chosen proudly for the patch depicting a black buffalo on a green shield, faced their own officers' doubts as often as they faced training drills. Illiteracy was a genuine issue, exacerbated by the poor educational systems in the segregated South, but the soldiers attacked their studies with the same fervor they did their maneuvers. Major General Edward M. Almond, the division's commander, a Virginian known for his rigid, by-the-book style, was a man whose own prejudices often clouded his judgment. He pushed the men hard, but his reports were frequently damning, focusing on perceived failures, which were often amplified and circulated by an army leadership seemingly predisposed to believe black troops were unfit for combat. In the late summer of 1944, a critical manpower shortage in the Italian campaign, thanks to forces being diverted for the invasion of southern France, forced the issue. General Mark W. Clark's Fifth Army needed every rifleman it could find. Despite Almond's often pessimistic reports, the decision was made. The 92nd would deploy. The 370th Infantry Regiment was the first element to ship out, arriving in Naples, Italy, in July 1944. The rest of the division followed in October. They were thrown into the line in the mountainous coastal sector of the Western Apennines. This was a sector known as the hinge of the Allied line, stretching from the Ligurian Sea to the western flank of the main Gothic Line defenses. The German Gauntlet, the Cerchio Valley. The Gothic Line, or Gotenstellung, was Field Marshal Kesselring's masterwork of defense, a 100-mile-long network of more than 2,000 fortified machine gun nests, casemates, bunkers, and anti-tank positions, all woven into the rugged, unforgiving terrain of the Apennines. It was designed to bleed the Allies dry and stop their advance into the Po Valley. The 92nd was tasked with securing a critical area around the Cerchio River Valley and the Ligurian coast. It was here, during the harsh winter of 1944 to 1945, that the division first stumbled, leading to the devastating internal and external narrative of failure that the German radio had so gleefully exploited. The Germans, utilizing propaganda, often dropped leaflets and broadcast radio messages directly targeting the 92nd. The leaflets, sometimes written in surprisingly good English, would mock the black soldiers, telling them to stop fighting a white man's war for a country that still treated them as second-class citizens. The radio taunts painted them as cowardly, inferior fighters. In December 1944, a massive German counterattack, Operation Wintergewitter, Winter Storm, struck the Cerchio Valley. Facing veteran German mountain troops, elements of the 92nd, including the inexperienced 366 Infantry Regiment, were routed and forced into a chaotic retreat, suffering heavy casualties. The official army reports that followed were brutal and scathing. General Almond, instead of contextualizing the failure, the troops were green, strung out across a vast front and ill-equipped for the specialized mountain warfare, blamed the soldiers' inherent deficiencies. The press, both at home and abroad, seized on the narrative of the Buffalo Soldiers' failure, further fueling the racial prejudices in the Army's high command. But the 92nd did not disintegrate. Many units fought with exceptional courage. Technical Sergeant John R. Fox of the 366 Infantry Regiment exemplified this bravery at the small Italian village of Somarena. As German forces rapidly advanced, Fox, an artillery forward observer, called for fire directly on his own position to halt the German attack. A selfless act that cost him his life, but stopped the enemy in its tracks. For this, he would later be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, decades after the war. The division had tasted bitter defeat, yet the men did not break. They saw the German mockery, heard the white officers' dismissiveness, and internalized a simple, fierce resolve. They had to shatter the narrative.
The Great Spring Offensive. The line must fall. By the spring of 1945, the Allies were ready for the final, massive push in Italy. Operation Grapeshot. The 92nd Infantry Division was assigned a critical, seemingly impossible mission: to crack the western anchor of the Gothic Line near the Ligurian Sea, particularly the heavily fortified sector around the cities of Massa and La Spezia. This was not a job for the faint of heart. The terrain was a hellscape of steep, terraced mountainsides, deep ravines, and narrow valleys, perfect for defense. The Germans had spent months transforming the landscape into a labyrinth of concrete, mines, and interlocking fire. The transformation of the 92nd in the lead-up to this offensive was astonishing. Shamed by the winter setbacks and galvanized by the constant German mockery, the men trained with a ferocious intensity. They were bolstered by a recent integration of experienced African-American volunteer combat platoons and the attachment of the legendary, highly decorated Japanese-American 442nd Regimental Combat Team, creating a unique, integrated fighting force within the segregated army structure. The attack commenced in April 1945. The Germans, still convinced of the Buffalo Soldiers' rumored cowardice, were about to be taught a savage, unforgettable lesson. The assault on Montignoso and Massa. The city of Massa was a key strongpoint, heavily defended. The approach was guarded by a succession of steep mined ridges. The 92nd launched its attack not as a hesitant green force, but as a unit driven by fury and a need for redemption. The fighting was savage, close-quarters combat in the mountains. Patrols and companies launched relentless, aggressive attacks, forcing the Germans out of their dug-in positions one by one. Vernon Baker's stand, the most incredible example of this fierce, indomitable spirit, came from Lieutenant Vernon J. Baker of Company C, 370th Infantry Regiment. On April 5, 1945, near the town of Viareggio, Baker led a company-sized assault on a series of German mountain strongpoints. The Germans were dug into caves and bunkers, creating a deadly kill zone. Baker, armed with a submachine gun, single-handedly charged a machine gun position, killing both occupants. He then crawled to another, dropped in 2 hand grenades, and eliminated a third position. He destroyed 2 more machine gun nests and an observation post, killing or capturing multiple German soldiers in a whirlwind of heroic action. Severely depleted and facing a major counterattack, Baker and the few remaining men were forced to withdraw. But that night he returned alone, traversing the treacherous mined slope to locate his missing soldiers, ultimately coordinating the retrieval of 2 wounded men and establishing the precise location of the enemy defenses for the next day's assault. His courage was beyond reproach. Like Fox, he was nominated for the Medal of Honor, an award that would finally be presented to him decades later, in 1997. The tenacious advance of the 92nd in this sector began to tear a hole in the western flank of the Gothic Line. The Germans were stunned. They had expected an easy fight, the retreat of December replayed. Instead, they were met with a disciplined, motivated, and exceptionally brave fighting force. The iron will and the final push. As the main Allied offensive surged elsewhere, the 92nd's relentless pressure on the coastal flank began to yield massive results. The division captured the city of Massa on April 10th, a victory hard-won against determined resistance. Their momentum was now unstoppable. They pushed through the heavily defended Cinquale Canal area, where an earlier attack had stalled, demonstrating a marked and crucial improvement in training and morale. The Germans' defensive structure, which they had boasted was impenetrable, was now fracturing under the weight of the Buffalo Soldiers' iron will. On April 19th, the division breached the final major defenses on the coast, opening the gateway to the Gulf of Spezia. The city of La Spezia, a vital naval port and key German supply hub, fell on April 24th. The speed and ferocity of the 92nd's late-stage offensive fundamentally altered the German strategy. The collapse of the western anchor of the Gothic Line forced Kesselring's forces to accelerate their retreat, preventing them from reinforcing their positions further east. The mockery had ceased. The laughter had turned to panic. In the final days of the Italian campaign, the Buffalo Soldiers continued their spectacular advance. They liberated the major industrial port city of Genoa on April 27, 1945, encountering massive celebrations from the Italian populace, who threw flowers, wept, and cheered, shouting "Viva Americani!" The sight of the black American soldiers, the liberators, marching into their city was a profound, powerful image of democracy in action. The silence of the mockers, and a double victory. The German army in Italy officially surrendered on May 2, 1945. The 92nd Infantry Division, the unit dismissed, mocked, and maligned, had not just held the line, it had shattered the enemy's last major defensive barrier. The division suffered over 700 killed in action, a heavy price for a unit that served in combat for less than a year. Their losses, often dismissed or minimized by the prejudiced historians of the era, were a testament to their valor and the relentless nature of the fighting. The story of the 92nd Infantry Division crushing the Gothic Line is one of the most astonishing reversals in World War II history. The black soldiers, who were systematically oppressed and doubted by their own country and taunted by their enemy as Untermenschen, achieved a profound double victory. They decisively defeated the Germans in their sector, performing brilliantly in a tough mountain campaign and liberating 2 major Italian cities. They decisively refuted the ideology of racial inferiority, both that of the Nazis and that of the segregationists in the U.S. Army. They fought for a freedom they had yet to fully experience at home, and in doing so, earned their place as one of the most effective and courageous divisions of the Italian campaign. The official narrative, however, remained muted for decades. It took years, often half a century, for the systemic racism to be peeled back and for heroes like Vernon Baker and John R. Fox to receive their rightful medals of honor. The Buffalo Soldiers of the 92nd Infantry Division did not just win a battle in Italy. They struck a monumental blow against the very idea of racial hierarchy on the battlefield and in the American conscience. Their courage was the ultimate, unanswerable silence to the German radio mocking laughter. They came to Italy as a segregated unit doubted by many. They left as liberators, their legacy an indelible mark on the fight for global democracy and civil rights at home.